Let's say you want to open a bank account. You walk into a branch, slide your passport across the desk. The clerk picks it up, checks the hologram, looks at the photo, looks at you. Then they ask for a second document, proof of address, maybe a utility bill. They compare the name, they check the date. 20 minutes later, you have a bank account. Now a few months go by. You forget your online banking password. You call the bank's helpline. They ask you a few questions, your date of birth, the last 4 digits of your account number, maybe the answer to a security question you set up during registration. A couple of minutes later, you're back in. Here's the question I want you to sit with. Both of those interactions were about identity. Both of them involved the bank satisfying itself about who it was dealing with, but they were doing fundamentally different things. And if you mix them up, if you treat them as the same kind of process, you will build systems with a very specific, very exploitable gap in them. The first interaction was identity proofing. The second was identity verification. These two things are not the same. They happen at different points in the life cycle of an identity. They involve different evidence, different standards, different failure modes. And the confusion between them is one of the most reliably exploited weaknesses in how organizations manage identity. Let's take them apart. The distinction maps cleanly onto the identity lifecycle we've been building throughout this series. Identity proofing happens once, or at most, a small number of times. It is the process of establishing for the first time that a claimed identity corresponds to a real subject. Before the account exists, before the credential is issued, proofing answers the question, should we create this identity at all? Is the person or entity claiming to be Alice actually Alice? Identity verification, by contrast, happens repeatedly, potentially thousands of times over the life of an identity. It is the process of confirming, at a specific moment in time, that the subject currently presenting a credential is the same subject to whom the identity was originally issued. Verification answers the question, is the person presenting this credential the legitimate holder of this identity right now? Proofing is about establishment. Verification is about continuity. Proofing asks, is this identity real and does it belong to the claimed subject? Verification asks, is the right subject still in control of this identity? The reason this distinction matters so much is that the evidence you need for each is completely different. The standards you hold each to are completely different, and the ways each can fail are completely different. An organization that funds its identity security on verification alone, strong authentication, multi-factor, hardware keys, but treats proofing as a box-ticking exercise, is building a very strong lock on a door with a fraudulently issued key already behind it. Identity proofing is the process of taking an unverified claim, I am Alice, and producing a verified bound identity that a system can trust going forward. In practice, it breaks down into 3 stages, and each one is a potential failure point. The first stage is evidence collection. The claiming subject provides documents or data that support their identity. In high assurance contexts, this means government-issued photo ID, biometric data, and a secondary corroborating document. In lower assurance contexts, it might be as minimal as an email address and a phone number. The choice of what evidence to accept is itself a security decision, because the strength of the resulting identity is bounded by the strength of the weakest evidence accepted. The second stage is evidence validation. The collected documents are checked for authenticity. Is this a real passport or a forgery? Has this document been reported stolen? Does the biometric match the photograph on the document? In remote proofing, where everything happens online without a person physically present, this stage is the one that most often gets compromised. A sophisticated attacker can submit high-quality forged documents, pass a liveness check using deepfake technology, and walk away with a legitimately issued credential in a false identity. The third stage is subject binding, confirming that the subject presenting the evidence is the same person to whom the evidence refers. In person, this is relatively straightforward. The clerk looks at the passport photo and compares it to the face in front of them. Remotely, it requires liveness detection, biometric matching, and increasingly, fraud signals gathered from device behavior, IP geolocation, and prior interaction history. The output of successful proofing is an identity record with an established trust level, sometimes called an assurance level, that reflects how rigorously the proofing was performed. A high-assurance identity, proofed in person with biometrics and government documentation, can be trusted to access sensitive resources. A low-assurance identity, proofed only by email confirmation, cannot. And crucially, that assurance level is set at proofing and does not automatically improve over time. If the proofing was weak, the identity is weak permanently unless it goes through reproofing. Identity verification is what happens every time a credential is presented after the identity has been established. At its most basic, it's familiar. You enter a password, the system checks it against the stored hash, it matches, you're in. But that framing undersells the complexity of what verification actually has to do in modern systems. Verification has to answer 3 questions simultaneously. First, is this credential valid? Is the password correct, the token unexpired, the certificate unrevoked? This is the technical check, cryptography, database lookups, revocation list queries. Systems generally do this well. Second, does this credential still belong to the identity it was issued to? This is where things get more subtle. A credential can be technically valid, the cryptography checks out, the token hasn't expired, but no longer belonged to its original subject. It was stolen, it was transferred, the account was taken over. Verification systems that only perform the technical check and don't consider behavioral signals, device posture, or anomaly detection will miss this category of failure entirely. Third, is this identity still appropriate to trust? Even if the credential is valid and genuinely held by its original subject, is that subject's identity still what it was when the credential was issued? Has their role changed? Have they left the organization? Has the context of the access request changed in a way that should trigger step-up authentication? That third question is the one most verification systems don't ask. They check the credential. They don't check the identity behind it. This is the gap that continuous verification, sometimes called continuous authentication, is designed to close. Instead of treating authentication as a single event at the start of a session, continuous verification monitors signals throughout the session: typing patterns, device health, network location, behavioral anomalies. If something changes mid-session in a way that suggests the identity has been compromised or transferred, the system can step up or terminate the session. It's a more expensive approach. It's also, in high-risk environments, the only approach that actually matches the threat. Let's be concrete about what goes wrong when organizations conflate proofing and verification. Scenario 1. Strong verification, weak proofing. The organization has excellent multi-factor authentication. Every authentication event is genuinely proving that the credential holder is the credential holder. The problem is that the credential holder is an attacker who fraudulently obtained the identity at the proofing stage. All that excellent verification infrastructure is faithfully serving the wrong person. Scenario 2. Strong proofing, weak ongoing verification. The employee was onboarded in person. The identity is impeccable. But 3 years later, verification is still a single password. The password gets phished. The attacker now has access to an identity with a very high proofing assurance level and very weak verification. The access it grants is substantial. The credential protecting it is not. Scenario 3. The account recovery gap. This is perhaps the most common. An organization invests heavily in both proofing and primary authentication, but account recovery, in many systems, is a backdoor that bypasses both the proofing investment and the verification infrastructure. An attacker who can social engineer or predict the recovery factors doesn't need to beat the primary authentication at all. They walk around it. The rule that follows from all 3 scenarios: the security of an identity is determined by its weakest pathway, not its strongest. The practical takeaway from everything in this video comes down to a single principle. The assurance level of both the proofing and the verification should match the risk level of what the identity is being used to access. A low-risk service, a content platform, a newsletter subscription probably doesn't need in-person proofing or hardware-based authentication. The cost of that friction would far outweigh the risk of a compromised account. A high-risk service, access to financial accounts, healthcare records, critical infrastructure, requires high assurance at both ends. Weak proofing that creates a fraudulent identity cannot be rescued by strong verification. And strong proofing that issues a robust identity cannot be protected by weak verification. The identity assurance model has to be a deliberate design decision, made with full awareness of what the identity is used for, what it protects, and how it can fail at each stage. Not a default, not a convenience, a choice. Proofing and verification are not the same process, applied at different times. They are different problems, requiring different evidence, different standards, and different thinking about failure. Proofing establishes the identity. Verification maintains trust in it. Both can fail independently. And a system that is strong in one while weak in the other is not a strong system. It is a system with a gap that has a specific shape in a specific place, waiting to be found.